In 1988, Carol Thomas, 45, and her daughter Helen, 24, from Birmingham, England, worked together at a mill which was close to where they lived. Every workday, Helen would walk to her mother's house and together they would walk to the mill, which was about 50 minutes away. The walk to work took them through various alleyways between houses. However, on one particular morning, on the 30th of March 1988, when it was still fairly dark, they heard a distant humming noise and could not work out where it was coming from. Else it was too early in the morning for the factories to be operating, and at that time of day it was normally very quiet. Suddenly, a bright light shone down from above, like someone was shining a torch on them. They both looked up and the light started to get larger and larger until it was directly above their heads. Both of them were terrified and grabbed hold of each other's hands. All of a sudden they started to feel dizzy, and the next thing they remember was walking along the alleyway in an erratic manner, both dazed and confused. Carol looked at her daughter and could see that her leather raincoat was wet, but it had not been raining. They both knew that something was not quite right, and things got even stranger when they arrived at work. As they arrived at the gate, the security guard told them that they were very late for work. They did not remember much about the rest of the day, and from that day onwards were nervous about the walk to work. After the incident, they both noticed the reddening and blistering of their skin on their arms and faces that looked like sunburn, and they both suffered from nosebleeds and discharge from their navel. Helen was also missing a circular patch of hair from the nape of her neck. Several years after the strange experience, both mother and daughter were still shaken by what they had experienced, especially the lost time on the way to work. They told their story to Tony Dodd, who had served in the North Yorkshire Police Force for 25 years, where he worked as a detective in the Crime Task Force. It was early one morning while serving in the force that he saw a large disc-shaped object whilst driving across the Yorkshire moors. This episode triggered a lifelong interest in UAPs. Using his investigative experience, he went on to become a leading authority on extraterrestrial phenomena. They told Dodd that they were glad they had experienced it together for proof it actually happened. On March 12, 1994, Helen and Carol agreed to undergo hypnosis, which took place in separate rooms so that they could not hear what each was saying. Carol was the first to be hypnotized and was asked to recall the events of that morning in March 1988. She described the usual morning routine up to when they arrived at the alleyway. All of a sudden, they heard a low humming sound and then a light appeared above them, like a torch shining down, which got larger and larger. Now terrified, they grabbed hold of each other's hands and felt strange. The light was suddenly below them, and they could see what looked like the moon above them, and then were moving towards it. Carol then stopped talking, and when she spoke, she was hesitant and confused, saying, "Where am I?" They were now in a room where everything was white with windows all around it. She's lying on a table and unable to move. She has no clothes on. There appears to be netting over her legs, and it feels wet. She was able to look across and can see her daughter Carol, who is also lying on a table naked with netting over her legs. What are they doing? Helen then describes strange beings around the table. They are small, with tiny ears and big black eyes. They are very thin, with 3 long, thin fingers. They are not wearing any clothes, and their skin is white. These beings are standing around the table and her daughter's table. They are touching her stomach, and it feels very cold. They're looking at her hands and feet, and they have a long, thin glass tube which they're pushing into her stomach through her navel, but she's feeling no pain. As the tube is sticking out, they are now looking at her hair and start pulling at it. They're removing the tube, which is full of fluid. She believes they're removing eggs. She's thinking, "Please don't hurt my daughter." A cup was then placed over her head. She is allowed off the table and taken to a large screen, where one of the beings proceeded to push some buttons where a succession of symbols that included squares, triangles and wavy lines appeared, followed by footage of wars and explosions. Carol described her surroundings where everything appeared wet, and there were beings standing at the back of the room who were tall, unlike the small beings around the table. One of the tall beings has long blonde hair and blue eyes. He is wearing a silver suit with a blue badge showing a circle, a triangle, and 2 wavy lines. She then remembered putting her clothes back on and feeling dizzy and disoriented, and back in the alley with her daughter, who was wondering why her jacket was wet. Helen is then hypnotized and described the same scenario of walking down the alleyway, the humming sound followed by bright lights. She describes lying on a table without her clothes and a mother on a table next to her. She then cried and said, "I want my mum." She said she could not move and there's cloth over her legs and it's wet. She can see them putting an object into her mother's mouth. She said the beings are small with large eyes. They're not wearing any clothes and their skin appears wrinkly and they seem to waddle. There is a big camera hanging above her on a long arm. The room is white with windows all around. The little people are looking at her hands, feet and mouth and are touching her stomach. One of them has a thin rod with a silver ball on the end which she pushes into her nose, but there is no pain. When they remove the rod, the silver ball is missing. They insert wire into her ear and a tube into her navel where they remove fluid. They then place a large cup over her head. They turn her over and examine her back and legs and place what feels like a small circular object on the hair at the bottom of her head. It pulls her hair and she doesn't like it. They turn her over again and are looking at packets of cigarettes that they must have removed from their pockets. She's also taken to a screen and shown images. She's taken to another room and smells burning. They place a small wafer in her mouth, which she spits out. She's taken to another room and sees her mother standing next to a tall, beautiful blonde woman wearing a silver suit and badge. She is given her clothes, and one of the beings is rubbing her leather coat against his face to feel the texture. She's suddenly back in the alleyway with her mother. Under hypnosis, Helen recalls being abducted at 5 and being shown strange-looking children. She is given a small stone, as were the children, and she could hear voices coming from the stone. It turns out that Helen had been abducted many times. Her mother was asked about the stone, and she said yes, she kept it under her bed for years. She did not know where it came from. The abduction of Carol and Helen Thomas bears a striking similarity to many other abduction cases. What do they want? Is it to better the human race or their own race?